Welcome to episode 7 of Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things. This is Sean. I'm here with my co-host Sam. Say hi, Sam.
Hi, Sean.
We are very excited to talk about episode 7. Safe to say we absolutely loved this one, and I'm being sarcastic. We had a lot of problems with this one. So we're going to go through it and try to be nice when we can, but we're also going to be realists in what we didn't like. Sam, overall thoughts on the episode?
Overall thoughts on the episode. Before we do that, real quick, go to Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things on Facebook. Give us a like, subscribe, share, rate us on your podcast catcher. Thank you to everybody who's been giving us feedback, engaging with us. We appreciate it, and we look forward to continuing that. Spoiler alert for the show, the books, and the movies. My thoughts, high-level thoughts. First time I watched it Friday when it came out. Did not like it very much. My wife, your sister Haley, also did not like it very much. I rewatched it by myself. It got slightly better on a rewatch, but the problems that we'll talk about are still there, and they're not going anywhere. I think there is one plot line in particular that I really appreciate, a lot of the acting, a lot of the scenes, but there's other aspects of it which are just completely nonsensical. And then some of the other plot lines don't have as many redeeming qualities.
Yeah, and I'll say across the board, most of our issues with the show tend to be writing.
Yep.
And occasionally the directing. In this episode, because I live on the West Coast and Sam's East Coast time zone, I get episodes at 9 p.m. on Thursday nights. So a lot of times I have the opportunity to watch it well before Sam does. So the last one I watched, and I sent him a text, there's one scene that I absolutely hated. Haley was actually able to pick it out, but I'm excited to talk about that scene when we get to our commentary.
All right, well,
that problem I had was 100% directing. The acting, I feel like the actor was directed to act a certain way, and it just came off very poorly to me.
Well, we can talk about that because I have some thoughts too. And a lot of it is hard to tell what's acting and what's directing. But we should really do the summary, the recap, and then we'll get into this because I think there's probably a lot to talk about. So let's hit this recap quick.
We're going to start with Galadriel and the Southlands. Galadriel awakens after the eruption of Orodruin. The only problem she seems to have is messier hair. Many civilians are dead. Structures are on fire. Galadriel can only find Theo. Isildur saves Valandil, but the other friend dies underneath one of the collapsed structures. Isildur, Valandil, and Muriel save more people, but a building collapses on Isildur, and in doing so, Muriel also gets blinded by ash. Galadriel and Theo leave the village, and Galadriel seems defeated. Elendil is leading Southlanders and Númenóreans to safety, thinks Isildur has died in the chaos. Elendil and Valandil discover that the queen is blind. Galadriel reveals she thinks Celeborn is dead. Celeborn is her husband. You have also seen him in Peter Jackson's trilogy. She reveals to Theo that she hasn't seen him since he went off to war. Elendil, at the camp, lets Isildur's horse Beric go wild because it won't listen to anyone. Galadriel and Theo show up at the camp. Theo reunites with Arondir and Bronwyn in the medical tent. Blind Muriel has most Númenóreans leave. They get back on a boat and sail back to Númenor, but a garrison stays behind to help the Southlanders and also search for survivors. Blind Muriel declares Númenor will return for vengeance. Southlanders go to a town called Pelargir, which is a former Númenorian colony. We discover Halbrand is mortally wounded. He needs elvish help to live. Galadriel and Halbrand get on horseback to maybe ride thousands of miles to Lindon to get that elvish help, even though his wound festered overnight and he is in very bad shape. In the ash and smoke, orcs can move around at day, and we finally have a cheesy scene where the word Southlands becomes Mordor, and that is what happens in Tir Harad.
I like that you can insert your commentary into the recap.
There were a couple of those where I felt like I had to because they were.
Yeah. All right. Well, the Elrond, Durin, and Khazad-dûm plotline. We begin with Elrond making his proposal to King Durin and several dwarf lords. Proposal is to exchange grain game and timber for 500 years in exchange for mithril. Elrond then leaves. King Durin rejects this proposal in a discussion with Prince Durin. Back with Disa and Durin are talking. Disa encourages Durin to continue mining the mithril in secret, which he decides to do after a small piece of mithril is shown to heal a corrupted leaf from the great tree in Lindon. Durin and Elrond begin mining mithril in secret. There are some bonding scenes between the two of them. We almost get a reveal of Durin's secret dwarf name to Elrond, but they are interrupted when King Durin discovers the two of them. Elrond is expelled from Khazad-dûm. The mithril mine is ordered sealed, and in a scene after this, Prince Durin is disinherited by his father, the king. He returns to Disa. He and Disa have a moment in which she's encouraging him and also saying that soon the two of them will rule together and all the mithril will be theirs. We then cut to the cured leaf being dropped through the hole into the mithril mining area that was about to be sealed. The leaf falls for a very long time and then lands on the ground, revealing a Balrog awakening, bursting into flame, catching the leaf on fire, and then we cut with the Balrog roaring into the camera. And that is it for the Elrond Durin Khazad-dûm storyline.
And the last plot line of the episode are the Harfoots. The Harfoots, we see them get to the grove, but Orodruin's eruption has strategically only burned down their apple trees. Sadok and the other Harfoots ask the stranger to heal the trees with magic. Part of the tree breaks, almost hitting a kid. Everyone is afraid of the stranger again. Harfoots send the stranger to the other men, that they have a general direction of where there are villages of men, and they kind of point him in the right direction and send him on his way with an apple. The next day, turns out the stranger's magic worked and all the apple trees are better. And there's also random crops that have begun to grow in between the trees as well. Poppy lets a bucket go for water down a stream when she sees a footprint. It's found by the three cult ladies that were looking for the stranger. The cult ladies show up in the glade. They follow the stranger's tracks, but Nori stops them, saying he went the other way in an act to try to help him. The cult ladies burn down all of the Harfoot's wagons and food. This is followed by another speech that Sam will hate about how Harfoots stick together. And finally, Nori goes off to save the stranger from the cult ladies with Poppy, her mom Marigold, and a hesitant Sadok, who apparently is a trail finder. And that is it. That is
All
the
right.
end of the Harfoots.
Well, it's not the end of the Harfoots. It's the end of their storyline in this. We almost had the end of the Harfoots.
You were probably giddy when you saw the cult ladies start to attack them.
Yeah. So Haley said the same thing. She's like, look, you probably like that. I was like, no, I don't like this because I don't want to be enjoying the complete destruction of their homes and all their food and just put them in this terrible situation. I don't want any of this. I don't want any of these Harfoots. I think this was the last episode and the episode before that we talked about how, man, isn't the Southlands plot really interesting? Shouldn't we spend more time there? And I feel like every time we have a Harfoot scene, it's just distracting from the other two plot lines, which are more enjoyable. For all the problems that we have and we can talk about with Elrond and Durin's plot line, I actually enjoy watching it more so, largely because of the relationship between Elrond, Durin, and Disa, the three of them. It's just so much more enjoyable than anything with the Harfoots.
It's almost like the showrunners have a different writer for each plot line, and whoever's writing the plot line for Elrond and Durin is really good at relationship building.
Mm-hmm.
And then whoever is writing the plot line for the Harfoots is just horrible at relationship building.
I would say they're bad at a lot of things.
But I'm saying just in terms of that stark difference between writing capabilities. If it's the same writer, you show us in other plot lines that you have the ability to write a good plot and have good dialogue and good interactions and at least make sense most of the time. But then in other plot lines, we're left sitting there going, nothing makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know if I would describe any of the plot lines as particularly good. I think The Southlands, we have good action, especially in the last episode, and that distracts somewhat. Actually, you know what I was really reminded of? Have you ever watched the behind the scenes documentary of the Star Wars prequel trilogy?
I'm not sure which doc you're referring to. I've
It,
seen Disney Plus. Shout out to Disney Plus. Documentaries on Star Wars that they've released, but
so this is probably not something that would make it on Disney Plus because it was actually like very revealing in some of the production problems, especially with episode 1. And I can't recall if it's episode 1 or episode 3, but they have a scene of George Lucas walking out of his office holding up a wad of paper saying, I have a first draft of the script. And there's like a countdown thing on the bottom of the screen that says like 3 months until shooting starts. Generally speaking, you want your script finalized before that so people can, build sets and you can get your actors and you can do all that other stuff. So he says in that scene, well, yes, but there are a lot of places where it just says they fight, which to me like perfectly encapsulates the problem here, where you don't put enough effort into writing a good script and not just the dialogue. Like I've largely gotten over my issues about the dialogue, because at first I thought, okay, these blemishes are really distracting to me. But now it's just the actual terribleness of the plot in many ways has eclipsed my issues with the dialogue. To a certain extent, a fun action sequence, an episode like what we got last week, where there's just a lot of fighting, it can paper over some other challenges. But as soon as that goes away, you're left with the relationship between the characters on screen. And that's where, in many cases, the Southlands plot can fall short. Galadriel, especially, the Harfoot stuff, we've had zero action with them, maybe with the exception of the wolf stuff, which was just over and done with so quickly. I think we jumped into that pretty quick. We do have some specific points that we wanted to talk about.
Yeah, so we'll start with one of mine, and that has to deal with the Southlands and Galadriel. And when she wakes up, they've basically shown us that this village is tiny. If you can remember the cut scene a few episodes ago where Theo and Rowan go out to get food, and they have the wagon and they're going through the center of town. That shot makes it look like there's only a handful of structures and buildings in this little village. Yeah, including like the giant tavern or inn or whatever that's supposed to be. But after this eruption, when the eruption occurs, almost all of the main characters are within like 10 feet of each other. The eruption happens. We don't know how much time has passed. The show doesn't make it clear how much time has passed. We get all of these characters awakening and looking for each other. And Galadriel and Theo just decide to peace out after like 2 minutes of looking for anybody else.
Well, it's Galadriel. We open with Galadriel waking up. And by the way, and you said something like nothing is just not even her hair. I can't remember exactly how you described it.
Her ponytail is disheveled.
That's her ponytail is disheveled. She's covered in ash. By the way, that ash would be so hot, it would burn everything it touched. So she wakes up, she looks around. The first thing she says is Hallbrand. The second thing she says is Elendil. We establish that she at least wants to know or wants to find these two people. She then stumbles around for a little bit, connects with Theo, who is he yelling for his mother? I can't even remember.
He
is yelling for
mother. Yeah.
Yes. And then so the two of them connect.
I was about to say he yells out Bronwyn, but that made no sense. Why would he yell out his mom's name?
So between the two of them, there are 3 people that we know that they're looking for. And without seemingly putting any energy into identifying those 3 people, they immediately leave and they walk off screen. Meanwhile, the camera pans and there's like a person on fire on the ground, like trying to crawl out from some debris that they just completely walk by him. They don't give him any aid whatsoever. And then it's not clear that any time has passed because it is just a pan. It's not a cut. So the camera is basically one shot. And then we immediately get Muriel, Valendil, and Isildur in the same scene, and then they're doing stuff, they're rescuing people. So for whatever reason, Galadriel and Theo just go off on their own, putting no energy into finding the people they seemingly cared about, and vice versa, especially with Theo. You'd think Theo's mom would be shouting, Theo, where are you, Theo? Arondir would probably be putting some energy into finding Theo as well. And we know that they're alive, one, because I don't believe they would kill off any major characters. Like they've made it evidently clear that plot armor is the best armor in this show. And then at the end of the episode, we know that they're alive because they all reunite, seemingly fully able to walk around, and in no way, shape, or form worse for the wear due to either the battle or the volcanic eruption.
Yeah, it just didn't make sense at all.
No,
and it's one of those things where I'm having a hard time verbalizing how I want to phrase this. And I'll start by saying there's an article that was just released. Granted, it's by Screen Rant, so it's not like the most
it
reliable of sources.
Technically it's an article, but
yes.
Yeah.
But there's a quote by the showrunners: season 2 may take another couple of years as production has just begun for season 2. I'm hoping in that couple of years they slow down, they start to reflect on a lot of the criticism that has come out about the show, make an effort at least to shore up these plot holes that are so blatant that it's making the show less enjoyable. And it's really basic things like, why would Galadriel and Theo stop searching almost immediately and just leave town?
And I will say the explanation is because it's not about what the characters would do in that moment. It's about what does the plot, meaning what do the writers need them to do? The writers were not thinking, Galadriel would be helpful and she would try to help other survivors. She would try to reunite this child with his mother. She would try to find the people that she seemingly cares about. No, what the writers said, no, we need Galadriel and Theo off in the woods so we can have these character moments between the two of them. So it's not about characters, it's about plot.
But therein lies my point, though. Like, if they can take time, all of these issues could be fixed so easily with writing. Galadriel and Theo, if you have to have them off on their own, when Orodruin erupts, have a battalion of orcs attack the village at the same time.
I was just thinking the exact same thing. That is how you split people up, is you give them a reason.
Yeah. And Galadriel has a child with her.
Mm-hmm.
She can't stay and fight. She has to get the child to safety. There's so many issues like that. Like, most of my problems with the show when it comes to the writing and the decision making, you could fix by just either adding something or subtracting something that then causes it to make sense.
Yes.
What their decisions are being made. Yeah, I don't know. We could go on forever about that.
Well, but you mentioned directing, and so you want to jump to this point really quick, because I think it's connected to a lot of the issues that we saw with Galadriel. Because yes, it's writing, but it's also there are people in television and movie production who are paid specifically to make sure that the things happening make sense. There's continuity between the scenes. I saw a tribute video to why the Lord of the Rings, is such a great piece of cinematic history. They, the fight scene in Edoras where the Gandalf is about to free Theoden from the influence of Saruman, and Gimli, Aragorn, and Legolas are fighting kind of the brigands, or the thugs who work for Grima.
Yeah,
there's a cut that is that maintains perfect continuity in the fight between Legolas and one of his brigands, but it's shot from the reverse angles. So you had to have somebody who was so particular about, okay, Legolas, or Orlando, your elbow was at this angle. Okay, Guy, you're bent this far down. This is, and not just those two, but everybody else in the scene maintaining perfect continuity. You don't have, you seemingly can spend $1 billion on this show, but you can't put any of that into the people whose job it is to make sure the things on screen make sense. It's like nobody even watched it when they finished it to make sure, we really need to show why those two were separated. Or even the stuff with Queen Muriel. I didn't think her injury was so severe. Her injury did not look so severe that she would be blind. She just looked like her eyes were open. You could just do CGI and show her eyes are really badly burned. There's no swelling, there's no nothing. It just looks like she's blind because she got hit on the head with a stick or something like that. Something out of a really bad movie. There's
a handful of burn marks around her eyes, I noticed. But her
that
eyes
wouldn't cause you to go blind.
No, her eyes themselves look fine.
Yeah.
And you could have done that in any, and it may not have come off as accurate, but you could have made her eyes a little more opaque
Yes.
to show that she's blind now. Like
Yeah.
having burned your eyes might not cause your eyes to do that, but then you're at least showing some form of injury.
Yeah. And
But
that-
in
sorry.
that directing point, I think the point you wanted to come back to was mine on terrible soap opera direction.
Yes.
Okay. That was the one scene that I hated the most out of all of these. And for those who have watched the episode, it starts by Muriel, for some reason, seeking revenge against all of Orcs and Sauron, and she'll be back to vanquish the enemy. And then she cuts to Elendil and says, Elendil? And the camera pans from the two of them to him. And it's the most absurd cry acting I think I've ever seen. And it legit looks like a soap opera scene. It felt so out of place.
His face is so contorted. And so this is why one of the things I mentioned at the top when I want to on this point.
He didn't even react that way when he found out his son died.
Correct.
But he's that sad that they're going to come back and fight the people who just killed his son. Like,
yes,
I don't know.
They're up to this point. I think a lot of people have, and rightly so, have praised the actor who portrays Elendil. Like he carries a lot of those scenes in Numenor. This was the first episode where I think we kind of went a little bit beyond his range with that scene in particular. But
that's the one scene in the whole thing, in this whole episode, that I thought they went too far. But I think the direction got that out of him. I don't think it's the actor. And we might disagree on that. But I still think he's one of the bright spots in terms of acting in the show.
Yeah.
That's just one thing that the director should have completely laid off on what they were asking him to do.
Yeah, I mean, up until this point, he has been more of a stoic figure. We get the sense that like he loves Isildur, but he's kind of frustrated by him. And I still don't get, how did they get separated? Because in the end of the prior episode, they were together. It like as close as any two people in that village. They were right next to each other talking to the horse barrack. So they get separated again. Who knows why? You think maybe they would have stayed together, especially in this time of crisis, but fine. There is a scene earlier when he is walking beside Queen Muriel, who's on a horse, and his face, he kind of looks like he's in shell shock or disbelief or just kind of a almost catatonic, just completely blank stare walking ahead. That was the first time I saw a little crack in that actor's facade, basically. And I don't think it's the actor. I think it is and it isn't, right? That is, I think we hit maybe end point of his range, but part of that is also on the director to figure out like different, something else, give your actor something else to respond to, some other way to get the portrayal. But yeah, it was
It was bad.
It was not good. And it draws you out of it, but it's so easy to get drawn out of this because there's so many areas that just beg to be disbelieved. Like going back to the prior episode with the entire reason that we're all here is this completely ridiculous eruption mechanic.
And I'll say, I'm usually really good at suspending disbelief. There's a lot of times in this podcast where we're talking about issues that we have, and you'll have a lot of issues that I don't have any problem with that I'm able to just go over.
Yeah.
But episodes 5 and 7, even I'm having a hard time coming to terms with what I'll accept and not accept. They're beginning to lose me, and we got to have like a kick-ass episode 8.
I don't know what they're going to do.
But
no,
I have no idea how they can, but that's what I need at this point. Because if we have to wait 2 years for season 2, I was so excited for this show. What did it come out? September 3rd, September 2nd. Like I couldn't sleep. I was so excited. And now I'm at the point where I'm like, if I have to wait 2 years, how excited am I going to be when it finally does come back out? Because they started strong to me and it's slowly gone down, and they really got to bring me back up to keep me interested. Am I going to keep watching it? Yeah.
See, that's the problem, right? It's like they got us because a lot of this stuff is really kind of season recap stuff, but they slapped the Lord of the Rings name on it. They got characters that are ostensibly based on the ones that we have, but really their story is just kind of generic fantasy. There's some things on here which, by on here I mean in our notes that we're going to talk about, just areas where they're so clearly ripping off the Lord of the Rings and they're ripping it, and it's not even like they're taking the themes of the Lord of the Rings or of Tolkien. They're just taking some of the very specific scenes and the
Like that.
visuals.
There's one with Nori's mom, Marigold, where Poppy's like, "Oh, she's not going alone. I'm coming," and then Marigold says something like, "Well, you're not going without me."
Yeah,
and
no,
it's so reminiscent of
yes.
like Merry Pippin at the Council of Elrond, and you just don't need it. Come up with your own thing.
Yeah, you got one hobbit, Nori, who is declaring that they're going to go do something that's dangerous. You got their friend immediately saying, "I'm going to go with you," and then you have two other people who are coming along as well, because I guess it's got to be four people. You gotta have the mom, who up until this point has been completely skeptical of all this crap, and then you got to have Sadak, who is even more skeptical. Anyway, I don't want to get too much into the Harfoots. I've got another.
Yeah, before we destroy the Harfoots, let's cut back to your point. Galadriel waking up a different person.
Yeah. So this was challenging for me. I think that I like kind of some of the things that she was saying, but
it goes against everything she said
up
to this point.
It goes against everything she said in the prior episode. And so her characterization is so bad, but now inconsistent, where again, to the point of it's still not clear to me that the eruption of Mount Doom was so triggering that it's causing her character to change. And then seemingly over the course of this episode, we get a kind of a yo-yoing where, Theo is talking about, killing orcs, and she oh, those are dark deeds and they darken your soul and stuff like that. Was like, weren't you just talking about committing genocide? Seemingly, as if that was something that you're going to relish in. So they're really leaning into this, touching the darkness kind of, becoming the evil, which I just don't buy, because it really seems like it's like that is they took the Peter Jackson version of Isildur, who doesn't destroy the ring, who kind of they portray him as being seduced by the power of the ring. He calls it precious and it leads to his death or whatever. But that is not the Isildur who is actually in the books. The real Isildur knew that he could not master the ring, and he wasn't keeping it forever. He was taking it to Elrond. That's why, that's where he was going, because he knew that it would eventually overpower him, but he had enough insight to recognize that. And only in the most extreme scenario did he try to use it to escape. It was not something that was precious to him. And he was not this, they needed Isildur to be like that so they could set up Aragorn, which was an effective way to make Aragorn this great heroic character. In the books, Aragorn does not have any of the hesitancy about becoming the king, as we are seen with the portrayal in the films. He's got Anduril reforged at the beginning. The quest is also about him becoming the king of Gondor and Arnor. Very different in the films, and they needed that for Aragorn's arc. And I think that's what they're trying to import into Galadriel, which is this Isildur flawed character, kind of coming close to the darkness and will she, won't she? And unlike Isildur, I think we're starting to see her kind of maybe waking up a little bit, but it still ends with her basically committing to keep fighting alongside Muriel when she says the elves will be ready. You're just going to go straight back to this war that you seemingly had some different thoughts about last night when you were talking with Theo. So
hey, Gilgalad, I never went to Valinor. It's going to be a great conversation.
Okay,
hey, also, by the way, I went to Numenor and we're having an army go attack the Southlands. You ready?
Yeah. The other note I had on Galadriel is this backtracking of giving her a husband, which when that happened, that's what I thought was the scene that you had such a negative reaction to, because it is again taking a character from the lore, from who appears in the Jackson movies, and you're bringing him up at this point, when you've already had so many opportunities for Galadriel to reference him, and I'm thinking not just in flashbacks, but the conversation with Gil-galad, really, especially the conversation with Elrond in the forest, or the sculpture forest. Like, we should go back and watch and see if now they're going to say that one of those is Celeborn. She certainly wasn't in front of it. She was in front of Finrod, but it's like, you've never mentioned him. He never came up when you're talking about all the loss that you've had.
Yeah, introducing Celeborn in this episode felt like they had already written so much of the season, and then they were just like, "Oh, we should add Celeborn now."
It goes back to this mystery box approach where, where's Celeborn, right? Why haven't we seen Celeborn? Is he Sauron's prisoner somewhere in some yet unnamed, undiscovered fortress? I was like, it's just, if he was actually your husband and you were so in love with him, wouldn't that have been part of your centuries-long quest to discover your husband? And we don't get any reference of that.
I'll say I wasn't really that bothered by this scene and dropping Celeborn now, just because there's no way he's dead, right?
Well, but that requires you to be an audience member having that realization.
Yeah.
Right. Which is the thing that's so frustrating, is you're the only way that you cannot have a visceral negative reaction to that is because you have to say, oh, wait, I'm watching a show written by people who are trying to be, mysterious.
Yeah. So looking at it from this point, because we know this is one of those things that they can't just destroy this lore, right? So Celeborn and Galadriel have big parts to play in the Fellowship of the Ring. Elrond marries Celeborn's daughter, so there's no way, like, you don't have Elrond's sons or Arwen if Celeborn is dead now.
Unless it's Halbrand becomes Celeborn, which I think,
I don't know. So, and I guess that is a problem of the show where, like, if you're just an occasional fan, you go, oh, that's so sad that her husband's dead. But if you're a fan, and you go, if he's dead, I'm going to be pissed. Like, that's such a, just steer away from that.
You don't
plot
need
line.
it.
Like,
you don't need it.
Don't include it. You're going to anger people. It just doesn't make sense.
It's the almost exact same motivation as her brother.
It is the exact same.
It is. You don't need it. For people who knew Galadriel, the book Galadriel, I was okay with her not being married to Celeborn, even though I think in the lore they have been married at this point, and they've already, traveled around and led different communities of elves. Which, fine, I know you're completely throwing that out. Whatever. I could see the character Celeborn being a major figure in her, like, finally putting down the sword. That line she had in the first episode, right, where he maybe through their relationship, she sees a different way to fight the enemy through leading people with him, and his presence makes her better and her presence makes him better, and together they can be this this power couple that is a force for good. But instead it's just another kind of jammed in motivation for this character to be angry. And I'll say this, and this is, I specifically call this backtracking. It's giving a character motivations that really should have been there from the beginning if you're taking it seriously. And they do this multiple times in this episode. We get references in the Khazad-dûm plotline to other brothers of Durin, yet unmentioned other brothers of Durin. Fine, whatever. Except now they're important because he's been disinherited. We get references to Pelargir, a colony of Numenor, which would maybe have been mentioned at some point, as, I don't know, Farazan was talking about what the future expansion of this kingdom means for Numenor. Oh, you already have colonies there. Why wasn't this mentioned when they were talking about landing? It's all these things that in the show or in the reality of the world, the characters these things would have been relevant. Like, if it's relevant enough for them to flee there following the eruption of Mount Doom, why did nobody say we should flee to Pelargir or literally any other settlement? It's just like they live in this, like, really, really tiny world until it needs to be expanded because the plot needs them to do something. And you never get that sense with Lord of the Rings. Like, from the beginning that this is a large world, and you go to a very specific point to start, and then it expands from there naturally as the characters are moving through the story.
And one of the frustrations is the movies are so good at doing that. And we have basically the same amount of screen time for an entire season.
Yeah.
That the movies had for all 3 films, extended editions. The show is so much worse with the same amount of screen time. But anyway,
nothing has happened.
Yeah, let's move to shitting on the Harfoots now.
Okay.
This is because we very quickly went through my 3 topics, and we'll just allow you to vent your frustrations. I do have one question from a listener that I just got.
Oh, okay.
This is from my friend Stan Karras. He says, why does every Harfoot name sound like some sort of esoteric musical notation? What do you think, Sam? Is it just poor writing for Harfoot names?
Yeah, I mean, they're not very, I don't know about musical notation specifically. We get a lot of flower references. There's a marigold, there's a poppy. I think Eleanor is one of Sam's
full name.
Kid, right? And doesn't Samwise Gamgee have a daughter named Eleanor? Well, canonically, I think he has 13 children. I think one of them is named Eleanor.
Well, he's got to have 13 kids.
Largo is, I think that's just a pun. Like, that's a joke, because Largo just means big, right?
Yeah, Sadek.
Yeah, I don't know what that's a reference to. And I don't know if we know any other.
One is called
first names.
Mavel.
Oh, Malva. Yeah, which to me that's a reference to the Seinfeld episode of Dolores, right?
So Sam's kids, oh gosh, Frodo, Daisy, Eleanor, Mary, Primrose, Hamfast, Tolman, Goldilocks, Bilbo, Pippin, Robin, Ruby, and Rose.
So a lot of flower names. I mean, I think that's just it is what it is. I'll let the little Harfoots have their little names. Okay, so the first negative reaction I had was just, again, going back to some directing stuff. Show us this grove, because Nori describes it as, oh, it's, tree, all these trees everywhere, and we get like 4 trees, and 3 of them are burned, and it doesn't really look like the volcanic eruption did much damage elsewhere. I just don't get the fact that, everything is devastated. It's like, why don't you just keep moving? Like, just keep going, because you're pretty far away from the volcano. Like, we don't really get any sort of establishing shot to show their relationship with Mount Doom, at least that I could recall.
There is when they're looking at the mountain range. So they're on the other side of the mountains.
Yeah. I mean, again, I watched it twice, and I watched it taking notes, and it's still something that I'm struggling to understand. So maybe I'm particularly thick when it comes to the Harfoot stuff, or maybe this is just another piece of evidence that the producers of the show can't really establish their locations and their characters well.
And they tried to with this one, because on their journey from where they were to the grove, they actually showed like the dotted lines where they were traveling.
Oh, yeah.
If you remember that?
Yeah.
But they didn't do it far out enough to be able to show like where on the map with the major structures.
And this is something that I cannot, this was a criticism that I heard elsewhere. I think this was Men of the West, a great YouTube channel for Tolkien lore, and they also do reactions to the Rings of Power. But Tolkien, we've talked about it before, he was very deliberate in timelines and in geography. And because of that, all of his characters made, like, their actions in the world made sense from a timing and a location standpoint. And it does not seem like the writers are taking that type of care when it comes to not only just the immediate timeline of the events depicted on the show and the geography of the events depicted on the show, but also the overall timeline of where are we in the Second Age? How long has it been since the War of Wrath? We get these kind of vague references. This is another thing. The Harfoots referenced 1,000 years of history, meaning that they were around in the First Age. And Sadok mentions some volcano down south erupts every time there's a new evil in the world. How do you know that? Like, it's just these little things that characters say things so that characters can appear to be wise or to shed some light or add to some tone, but it doesn't make any sense that in Tolkien's universe, it doesn't make sense that they know the things that they know and they assert the things that they assert. Again, this is largely fan fiction that's branded as Lord of the Rings at this point. Yeah, my issues with the other issues with the Harfoots, like again, you mentioned it, they're afraid of him again because some of them are almost hit by a falling branch. It's like, why don't the small children stop going near the tall stranger when he's doing stuff?
I'll
How about
say
that?
what I got frustrated with that scene was how many times do the writers need to tell us that the Harfoots get afraid of him when he does magic? Because it's like the third time it's happened.
Yeah.
You have him attacking the wolves. They like freaked out. You have him with the fire, him healing his arm and Nori, and
Yeah.
now the tree. And it's like you're beating a dead horse at this point. Like, I get it. You don't have to have the same plot device happen 4 or 5 times. I hit a point where I'm just like, either A, they're going to learn and be like, when he's doing magic, stay away, like you said,
Mm-hmm.
or B, fucking let him go. If he's this dangerous and you keep getting afraid of him over and over again, and I get they finally do in this episode, but it really took 4 times before they hit the point where he needs to leave. Like,
so let
I
me
just
ask you a
got so
question.
annoyed by it.
Did they banish him? Like, did they send him away and he wanted to stay? Or did they recognize that he needed to go? And so they helped him leave?
It made it seem like Sadik and the Harfoots were finally like, you should be with your own people.
Yeah, but I don't get if like, was that punishment for endangering Poppy and Nori? Or was that them like rightly recognizing that this dude doesn't belong with us?
It didn't seem like rightly recognizing he doesn't belong with them. It seemed
Okay.
like, we're afraid of you. Go that way to get to your people.
I mean, it would have been, I hate the show when it tells us things and doesn't show us things, but I also, when they show us things, it needs to be clear.
This was not clear.
Yeah, it was like, I could interpret it either way, and it just contributes to my overall disinvestment in this plot line, because the next thing we have are these, like, everybody going crazy about apples, which reminded me of that Michael Showalter comedy album.
Burhune Orchards is back.
Yeah, our apples. And we get these 3 these additional strange characters who at this point you called them cultists, I think. I mean, we have no idea.
It's based off of lore. So in the lore, when Morgoth falls, there's like these semi-demon type characters that go out into the east and form cults of Morgoth, basically. I can't remember which source I heard that from in terms of that being the idea that this is them.
Yeah.
But there is a tie-in that these are cultists of Morgoth or Sauron trying to find the stranger, thus implying that he's either evil or he's some form of good that the cultists are trying to take out before he can stop them. But I mean, either way, I so far like the 3. I like the mystery that they've kind of enveloped around them, because if it was them very clearly like looking for Sauron this whole time, I would be frustrated by that. So leaving it up in the air is good at this point to me, but we'll see.
I mean, I don't dislike them on like face value. It would have been nice if they had been introduced maybe earlier in the show, and they can actually, because now it's, if we either are going to get a payoff to this stranger plot line in the final episode, or it's going to carry on largely into the next season, which I'm not optimistic that we're going to get any sort of satisfying resolution with him, because I think,
I was going to say, I'll say there's a quote by the showrunners that said things that they drop in season 1 might not find resolution until like seasons 3, 4, 5. So don't expect answers to all of the questions that they ask in this season in season 2. You could get answers later.
And why would we? And here's the thing: they probably don't even know what those answers are in some cases, right? That is inherent and problematic to the mystery box approach. What is going to keep the audience interested, not what makes a good story. You're trying to deliver the sensory and emotional experience of a good story, but you're not actually writing a good story. And you can keep kind of punting it down the line, right? Eventually again, we have to open the mystery box. And we did that with the hilt. And the hilt turned out to be a sword. The sword turned out to be a literal key to a mundane cause for an volcanic eruption. We're like, what if we saw some pretty strong magic with these cultists, right? They set the Harfoot's entire encampment on fire. That's harder magic than we've seen in Lord of the Rings ever. Like that's like, you can say Gandalf and the fireworks, but those are only vaguely magical, and they were still like rooted in like some sort of technology, right? Which we again see with Saruman.
Yeah, Gandalf on the bridge when he has that force field around him in the bubble.
Yeah, and that's still like pretty centrally located to his immediate surroundings, right? He can produce light, but not necessarily fire, and control it to the point where he can ignite multiple things in a pretty far off distance from him. And again, and I'm totally fine with that to a certain extent. The closer we are to the beginning of time, I am okay with magic being, more powerful or whatever. If you show that these are powerful figures and menacing, I can buy that. Now, just why don't we throw one of them into the volcano and see what happens? Right? Why don't we sacrifice one of them with the hilt? If Adar is somehow this kind of rival or opposition to Sauron, and if these turn out to be cultists of Sauron or Morgoth, wouldn't he wouldn't bat an eye seemingly at sacrificing one of them to give his orcs a home? Like, that would be interesting. Get two, quasi evil factions fighting each other. I don't know. There's so many different ways that you could do it instead of just not doing anything seemingly with them, because no one's injured in the fire. Yeah, your food is destroyed, your wagons are destroyed, but it's like they're already starting to rebuild. Yeah, and then we got the Hobbit, Lord of the Rings ripoff stuff that we've talked about. They're still sociopaths, by the way. Like, I think Poppy has a line of, "We've left enough people behind." I was like, yes, you have. You've left enough people behind. Just every time they try to have a heartwarming moment, it has to be underlined by the fact that they are like Darwinian extremists. And if you break an ankle, we're going to leave you on the side of the road. And then didn't you, my favorite line, and this was classic Tolkien, was when Sadoc said, "I'm going to go get my walking stick. It doesn't matter because we're all going to die." It doesn't, like, there's no poetry around it. Like, yeah, where's the optimism, right? Like, even in the darkest moments when Sam says stuff like, or Frodo says, like, "I don't know if we're going to make it back to the Shire," or something like that. Like, Sam's there to pull him out of it and like saving some food for the return journey. Like, that's the emotional core of those books. And by the way, Frodo was dealing with a little thing called the Ring of Power. Don't know if you've heard of it, but it can affect your emotional well-being. Anyway, I get worked up with the hobbits.
It's okay.
With the Harfoots.
Your last topic that you wanted to cover, Elrond and Durin and some of the idiotic plot. And I'll agree with you, because you've already talked about them a little bit. Some of the most heartwarming scenes between Elrond and Durin and the whole show. I'll say I got a little choked up, a little verklempt. The last episode that we saw them, we didn't see them in 6, we saw them in 5. And I also did a little bit in this one as well. When you had that moment where Elrond says, "Well, it doesn't actually mean goodbye, it means go to goodness," or something like that. Great writing. I'll give them credit where credit is due. It hasn't been due a lot in these last couple episodes, but this was an episode or a plot line or a couple scenes where they had sprinkled in some like really good dialogue and interactions, and then in the same plot line they sprinkled in some plot lines and dialogue that just didn't make sense at all. So what did you find idiotic about the plot of Elrond, Durin, dwarves in this episode?
So this was the plot line for me where the rewatch really helped. I went from being meh the first time I watched it to really, again, the scenes with Durin and Elrond especially are great. I even found myself understanding the perspective of King Durin when he said, powers at work in this world who, their minds are greater than our, I can't remember the exact line, but it was actually a pretty good explanation for why basically we're not going to help the elves. There are other powers in this world. I think he's implying the Valar, Eru, Iluvatar, who decided that this is what should happen. So who are we to go against that plan? Which I think that's actually like, I can understand that. I mean, Durin has a perspective. He wants to help his friend. He wants to help his friend's people. So I actually like,
I will say that gets into like the modern everything happens for a reason mentality that I completely disagree with. So in terms of like a theological belief, I think it's kind of a BS cop out for King Durin, but it does help you rationalize where he's coming from.
Mm-hmm.
I just personally disagree with that mindset.
Yeah. What? No. And like, I would,
but I get it.
Yeah. It's understandable, right? It's not, I hate the elves because of some reason. I think that interaction went a long way in my mind to explain where this tension is coming from. Because prior to this, the tension in this plot had been questionable. It was, people were distrusting each other and I think that whatever distrust is, the original root of that distrust is still ambiguous to me. They never really say why, it's just kind of the generic, oh, elves and dwarves don't get along type thing. And I don't think the
racist tropes.
Yeah, racist tropes. And like kind of you get some of that like Gimli Legolas stuff from the Lord of the Rings. They're not going to
trust an elf.
Yeah. Never trust an elf. It reminded me a little bit of a line in The Hobbit when I think it's at the end, Gandalf is talking about how, oh, these prophecies came true. The king is returned. Dwarves will rebuild Erebor, all this stuff. And Bilbo says, prophecy, I had a hand in that. And Gandalf says, do you disbelieve prophecy just because you may have had a hand in its coming about? And it gives you a little something to think about. Like the minds of the powers in the world, the mind of God is unknowable. And you can inadvertently further it, even though you think you aren't. And that's it. That's an interesting enough idea. I still don't like the fact that it's all in service of we need the mithril to prevent the fading, because that's completely just made up out of nowhere. In the lore, the mithril was a source of great wealth for the dwarves that they actively pursued to their own downfall with the Balrog. And there was an involvement of the elves, but it wasn't on behalf of the elves or because the elves asked them to. It was something they did, and the elves and the dwarves benefited
from the
mithril.
It's mutually beneficial to them both.
Yeah. It's so I have to say, at one point I think they were talking about the secret name scene where Durin was like, we only tell it to our mothers and our fathers and our sisters and our brothers. And he kind of pauses on brother. And then I thought he was going to say, and our boyfriends. And then he was going to say, give me the quail meat and give it to me raw. But we didn't get that.
Did you hear that? There were a lot of memes when that line came out.
Yeah, it was just like
in episode 4, it was like, give it to me, give me the meat, give it to me raw.
Yes. Enough with the quail sauce.
Someone had in the writing room had to have been like, this is an innuendo, right?
It certainly sounded like it. Anytime somebody says, give me the meat and give it to me raw, it sounds weird.
Yeah, that's one that they should have. And it takes you out of the moment. Like there's another person who complained about Durin's line where he almost says shit.
Yeah.
Because you take forever to take
it. Yeah. That was very un-Tolkien.
It was, but it didn't really bother me that much. But there's a lot of lines like that where it kind of takes you out of it. And it didn't take me out of it, but it definitely took other people out of it.
The quail sauce one?
No. The take a shit line. But I don't know. It is what it is at this point.
Yeah.
Our last segment of the show before we wrap up is Not Nerdy Enough, our weekly quiz, where one of us will quiz the other to figure out if they are nerdy enough to host a podcast about Tolkien. Sam, I'm quizzing you today.
Let's do it.
Question 1. What is the name of Isildur's friend that dies in the Southlands?
It is not Ulmo. It is not Autumno. It is Ontamo.
Correct. Ontamo. Question 2. What is the name of Arwen's sword?
Hadafang.
Correct.
I would say I only know that because you
Said
used
it last
that
week
in a prior quiz answer. Yeah.
when I was complaining about your
One of my
Eomer's sword. You
yeah, good
dipshit.
wine.
Which relative comes to Thorin's aid in the Battle of Five Armies? Question 3.
His cousin Dane Ironfoot.
Correct. Question 4. In what city is Tolkien buried?
Ooh, Oxford.
Correct.
Hmm.
In the books, who summons the river stampede instead of Arwen?
Well, I think there are two people at play here. I think Elrond causes the river to rise, and Gandalf adds the horses
The horse
as
effect.
waves. Yeah.
That is correct. How many of Thorin's company weren't related to Thorin?
Weren't related?
Were not related.
Oh.
You don't have to tell me the names. You just have to tell me the number.
So there were 13 in the company. I know for a fact Keely and Feely were related to him. And of course, he is in that number. So I will say 10 of the dwarves were not related to Thorin.
Only 3.
Really? Biffer, Boffer, Bombor?
Biffer, Bofer, Bomber.
See,
Were
I
the
got
3
something.
who weren't. All of the other ones had some form of relation to Thorin.
Interesting. All right.
Question 7. Which dwarf can be seen in the Fellowship of the Ring beside the tomb?
The corpse of a dwarf.
Yes, in Moria. I gave you 2 Hobbit questions back to back. I wrote these questions while I was eating lunch at Panera Bread. Shout out Panera Bread.
I had Panera Bread on Sunday.
Hashtag not a sponsor.
But if they want to sponsor us, go ahead and send an email to elsringsnerdythings@gmail.com. We're open to co-branding, straight up ad reads, free stuff, whatever you want. Okay.
For the ads.
So
Okay.
the dwarf in Balin's tomb in Moria holding the book of whatever.
Marzabul, I think.
Marzabul,
like
yes. That was Oin.
Incorrect. It was Ori.
Or I knew it was one of the dwarves from Thorin's company. Damn it.
I know the problem too is that it's those names Ori, Dori, Nori. All of the names are so close together that it makes it difficult. Which historical Anglo-Saxon story did Tolkien translate?
So I think he translated several. One would be The Green Knight.
There you go. That's the one I was looking for. So as
'Cause
long as you name one of them.
Did he translate Beowulf? I don't know if a published translation ever came out, but I bet he translated.
I'm sure he did.
Yeah.
Question 9. What language did Tolkien base Elvish on?
I think both Finnish and Welsh.
Yeah, that's correct. Those are the 2 I was looking for.
Very good.
Which Valar, question 10, which Valar was nicknamed the Judge?
Mandos.
Correct.
All right.
So that is 8 out of 10. I got you on the 2 Hobbit questions.
And both are about the company, Thorin and Company.
Thorin's company.
Well, and that's because I refuse to watch the Peter Jackson Hobbit trilogy anytime it's on TV. But I should reread The Hobbit.
Everybody should.
Everybody
if you're
should.
Listening to us right now, go back and read The Hobbit.
It's a great book. I tell you what, when I was in China studying abroad, I had China. When I was in China studying abroad, one of my classmates was reading The Hobbit, and he finished it and lent it to me. And at the back of the book was the first chapter of The Lord of the Rings. And it was such a great marketing gimmick that I immediately, after finishing The Hobbit, I was actually traveling around southern China when I finished it, read the first chapter. Was it The Long Expected Party? And went back and went to, at that time, one of the only English language bookstores in Beijing and bought I don't even know if it was a legit copyrighted version of The Lord of the Rings. And that was the version of Lord of the Rings that I had for a couple of years. And then I got a new version.
Well, that's it for us. What's up?
Sorry, we didn't even talk about how literally the title of the Southlands changes to Mordor in writing on the screen.
Yeah, I did at the end of my recap. very cheesy scene.
Well, we didn't react to it. That was in
Because
the
it
recap.
says, yeah, and he doesn't even say it. Adar doesn't even say it. And
Correct.
can we also talk about how shitty of a hype man Waldreg is?
That was. I didn't put this into my reactions, but what's with the shouting, and the
Dar.
chanting? There's a lot of chanting.
Dar. I know.
Even the humans do it too. Strength to the king, strength to the Southlands. What are they doing? Like, who writes this stuff?
Well, then who coordinated that? Yeah, it was really cheesy. I didn't like it. Unnecessary. You could just have, instead of like having that stupid visual, you could just have Adar be like, we'll call this land Mordor now.
Yes.
But yeah, I don't know.
I mean, Galadriel even says like the Shadowland or Land of Shadows earlier in the show. It's just maybe our recap. We can do 2 recap episodes. We'll do one where we give like in-depth reactions to stuff and just kind of talking about the entire series. And then the next episode will just be going through frame by frame every single episode, pointing out the things that we don't like.
Yeah, I'm excited for our season recap. I think we should just highlight like the top 5 things we loved, top 5 things we hated from season 1.
I agree.
And
so if you want that content, like, subscribe, share this podcast, get it delivered directly to your listening device, and you can hear Sean and I as we complain about the most minute and the largest things that are wrong with the Rings of Power.
Season finale next week. We'll follow that up with a season 1 recap. On our Facebook page, Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things, we have a question that you can answer or send us an email. We're trying to decide what our next topic is going to be, what our next series will cover. Our options are The Witcher Season 1, the Disney Plus Star Wars show Andor, House of the Dragon on HBO, or a fantasy book club. If you have an interest in what you would like to hear next, please send us an email or hop onto the Facebook page and vote in the comments. That's it for me. Sam, do you have anything else you want to add before we close out episode 7?
I got nothing to add, Sean. It's great, as always, to do this podcast, and I look forward to many episodes to go.
All right, with that, we'll see you next week.
Bye now.